Friends, greetings from my home office in Gurgaon. This is my first recording for BQ Prime under the banner Infravisioning, and I look forward to, as things stand now, about two such occasions a month to be able to talk to you and exchange my thoughts on infrastructure developments in India. The topic for this session is, and it's an important because I chose this topic for my first recording. The topic for this session is a historic reform in public procurement. Why is it historic? For decades, Indian industry, particularly those engaged in infrastructure, developers, construction companies, operators, have been complaining about what they call this L1 tender system, where without much focus on quality, the person who submits the lowest cost tender is chosen, and that has been often attributed for all the ills plaguing Indian public works. The L1 license tender Raj. The second thing that infrastructure players have been complaining for decades is delayed payments. There seems to be no control on timely payments by Sarkari entities. So, therefore, come October 29th, 2021, and we have this bombshell of a notification from the Finance Ministry, the Department of Expenditure, which seeks to completely change the historical paradigm of public procurement. And the person who steered this is none other than the Finance Secretary, Dr. Somnathan, with whom I had the privilege of discussing this reform, what is called the Finance Ministry notification of October 29th on public procurement 2021. And believe me, it required a significant amount of push by Dr. Somnathan, his colleagues, and a tremendous amount of bureaucratic and political capital to push this through the system. So what are these reforms? These reforms for Indian infrastructure and public works are in three broad buckets. The first one is the order and the discipline for timely payments. The second is the dismantling of what I've referred to earlier as the lowest cost tender or L1 Raj. And the last one is clear guidelines on not fooling around with arbitration awards, but honoring arbitration awards in cases where the Sarkari entity has lost the arbitration. I am now going to have occasion to discuss each of these in detail with you and also point out some of the further action needed. Let's look at the first bucket, payments on time. What does this notification say? It says, and it instructs and enjoins every government entity to clear 75% of a running bill in 10 working days. Now, just stop for a minute and think about it. For decades, Indian industry has stood at the door of bureaucracy asking for payments which could come as late as 90 days, 120 days, 1 year, who knows? This time, the notification says 75% of a running bill has to be cleared in 10 working days. And the balance 25% within 28 working days of a contract being closed. The final bill is to be cleared within 3 months on completion of works. A provision to pay interest may be put in. Now, please note, in bureaucraties, there is a major difference between can, shall, and may. Large parts of this notification of clearing these payments on time are shall. It's only the interest cost which is may. The responsibility of concerned officers have been clearly documented and they are accountable for unwarranted delays. As equally importantly, the system or this notification now instructs that online system for bills and payments monitoring on an e-platform is made available for contractors to track, which means anybody doing work on public works for the government will now have the privilege of logging in and seeing the status of his submitted bills and when the payment is going to be released, and if there is something holding it up, what is holding it up. So bucket number one, payments on time. Bucket number two, the famous L1 tender Raj, bidding. Now, remember, bidding comes in different forms and shapes. For consultancies, there are three procurement methods already in place, and these are pretty well known among consulting engineering firms. The first is quality and cost-based selection, called QCBS. For example, all engineers and consultants who work for the National Highway Authority of India are familiar with this system, that the tenders or the bids are evaluated on the basis of 80% technical score and 20% financial score. This is called QCBS, quality and cost-based selection. The other is the old LCS, least cost system, called L1. And there is SSS, which is called the single source selection. These three have been historically allowed, and now the notification allows a fourth method called the fixed budget selection, where the price is fixed and only merit is to count. This is fine for consultancies, but the bigger picture is, what is the bidding norm for works contracts? Friends, till now, all public works in our country were based on selection of the lowest cost tender, called the L1, which we are referring to as the L1 Raj. Now, this notification, in a sense, breaks down this decades-old hindrance and allows quality and cost-based selection, like consultancies, as long as the sponsoring authority can be a government department, a ministry, a PSU, as long as the sponsoring authority defines it as a QOP, a quality-oriented procurement, which means that if you're issuing a tender for a simple stone boundary wall, say in a village panchayat, that is not a QOP, and there you could still follow L1 because these are commodity bids. But if the project is defined as a project of quality, let us say a major project for tunneling in the Himalayas, or a significant irrigation project, or a 8-lane, 10-lane highway with bridges and overlays and underpasses, all these can be declared quality-oriented procurement. And in these projects, the sponsoring authority is allowed to select the bidder on the basis of 30% technical score and 70% financial score. Why 30-70? Why 30% technical and not 80% technical as is allowed in the case of consultancies? We will come to that later. For non-consulting services, it allows QCBS where order value is less than 10 crores. It allows quality-based system. So for example, if at a major airport, a medical company or a hospital were to set up hundreds of kiosks for COVID testing, that is a non-consulting service, but it's a service. And in the selection of the service, even the same 30-70 norm can be incorporated where the order value is less than 10 crores. There's always been a controversy in India about the applicability of single bids, that when a tender is out, no other company bids, but there is only one company that has bid. And historically, there's been a lot of controversy as to whether single bids have been allowed. In this notification, single bids have been allowed, subject to the fact of certain caveats that they have been widely advertised, that they are not completely wacko in their bids, etc., etc. But broadly, single bids are to be considered. So this is the major reform after timely payments on bidding, which is the beginning of the process of dismantling the L1 Raj. Now let's come to the third bucket, which is the arbitration awards. Now, as all of us know, there is constant, shall we say, disputes between a private sector provider of construction and related services and a sponsoring authorities. There are n number of jhagdas and disputes which ultimately go to arbitration. I have known from one of the largest construction companies that an arbitration process today can stretch as long as 10 to 14 years till it sees final resolution. This is a system that is broken down, and every government officer or institution now finds it convenient every time it loses an arbitration award to kick the process upstairs to the next higher court, and thereby delaying the process inordinately. So, what does this notification of October 29th, 2021 say? Very importantly, remember, this is the government speaking. It In the notification, it says that we recognize the negative and obstructive behavior by statal entities. You can't get a more, shall we say, transparent statement than coming from the central government itself. And having recognized that, it says where an award against a government entity has been lost by the statal entity, 75% of the award shall, not may, shall be paid to the contractor, may include interest against bank guarantee. This decision was actually taken by the PMO 5 years ago, but it was not honored. And today, this rule, like all the other all the other clauses contained in this notification, is now part of the GFR, the General Financial Rules of the Union of India, and therefore you can't now, fool around with them. You've got to follow them. Even challenging awards, challenging an arbitration award that the government had lost, the routine was that the concerned officer would challenge it in a casual and routine manner. That itself has been stopped, and the notification says that challenging an arbitration award that the government has lost can only be done with full application of mind by a duly constituted special committee of the board of that particular entity. Now, this itself, so I have now covered for you the top 3 buckets that relate to what I have started the talk to you by calling a historic reform in public procurement. Now, is this all, or is it the beginning, and are there still issues to be addressed? Well, there are issues to be addressed. For example, what I referred to earlier is, why is the technical score given at only 30% and not 80% as in consultancies? For example, you could argue that if it is a very complicated tunneling in the Himalayas, then only very specialized companies with knowledge and competence would be allowed to bid for that tender and be evaluated on their competence and past track record. So therefore, there is a clear case for arguing with the government that in special cases, provisions should be allowed to take the technical score as high as 80% as done for consultancies. So there is a case for increasing the technical score from 30, but we do recognize that it's a beginning. And I'm sure as this whole format settles down, these refinements will be taken care of. There is next the scourge of arbitrary encashing of bank guarantees and threats of blacklisting. Now, this is standard procedure in construction and EPC bids in Indian infrastructure and related projects. That on the whims and fancies of the procurement, if there is a dispute, a bank guarantee is encashed without giving notice or without giving time for a cure period. And even junior officers in state public works departments or even in central entities can threaten a private company by saying, you don't follow my instructions, I will blacklist you. So this business of arbitrary encashing of bank guarantees and constant threats of blacklisting, sometimes even going ahead and blacklisting firms without substantive reasons, has not been addressed in this notification and in future needs to be addressed. The scourge of irrational bids. All of us know that in public tendering, on public bids, there is always that one bad apple that gives a bid that is either extraordinarily low, or in the case of revenue sharing and other methods, extraordinarily high in the case of auctions, and that vitiates the entire bidding tendering process. We must have a system for weeding out irrational bids, whether that is done statistically or whether that is done through committees empowered to do it, is still to be addressed, but the future modifications to this notification must address that. Swiss challenge is a method of procurement that is popular for infrastructure projects the world over, which is a private sector player thinks of a creative project, brings it to the government and asks for the privilege of implementing it. India still doesn't have a clear policy on what is called Swiss challenge, and that now needs to be built into the procurement process. Independent engineers format. All public procurement have a system where an independent engineering firm clears the bills and assures quality. That system today is, in a sense, not really fulfilling its purpose. For a simple reason that the independent engineer is not paid by the government, is paid by the private sector company whom it is supposed to audit and monitor. it's built for failure. So the independent engineer system needs to be modified. Protecting bureaucrats against post facto investigation. Today's newspapers are full of the news item of the ex-Coal Secretary, Mr. H.C. Gupta, going to jail for rigorous imprisonment for his role during the so-called coal scam. Now, if the newspapers and commentators and editorials today all raise the question that if bureaucrats are not empowered to take decisions, then I'm afraid major infrastructure projects will come to a halt, and therefore a system needs to be created where bureaucrats are protected in genuine cases against post facto investigation, where there are no allegations of personal corruption against them, and decisions need to be taken by committees. A very important point in this entire October historic reform, October 29th reform, is the fact that it is only restricted to central government entities. It is only restricted to central government works contracts and related consulting and service assignments, which are issued by the ministries, departments, or PSUs. Now, procurement and public works is a state subject, and remember, 60% of public works in this country are done by the states. This procurement, public procurement, constitutionally belongs to the states, wherever the state is spending money on it. And these provisions currently apply only to central government procurement efforts. So it is a crying need for all of us who are concerned with the infrastructure sector to now rally state governments to come around to this point of view that the center's historic initiative in reforming public procurement processes now needs to cascade down to the states. This is important. Not only should media do it, not only should the state finance ministers wake up to it, but I also feel that Indian industry, led by the different industry associations, should now stand at the door of state governments, particularly the finance departments of state governments, and say, the central government has done it. This is good for industry. Why don't states adopt it? Should be taken up in mission mode. There are two other smaller issues that the future additions and modifications to this notification should take care of the fact that bid process cannot be indefinite. Sometimes bids are asked for and a decision is not communicated for 9 months to 12 months, by which time inflation has eaten away margin, prices have changed, conditions have changed. So there must be a definite time limit when you call for a bid to say that the decision has to come, and I would argue should not come later than 3 months. That's enough to evaluate the bids. So that needs taking care of. And price escalation in works contracts. Now today what is happening is, all of you are aware that there is fairly huge inflationary pressures in the economy. A large portion of that affects the construction trade, steel, cement, building materials. All of that push up the costs which were not seen at the time of the tender. Now, public works tenders do have a provision for providing price escalation, but the formula used there is not practical. To give an example, the entire package of works contracts, and I have personally spoken to some civil contractors who are today are undertaking public works for the central government. Their cost package has increased by anywhere from 16 to 20% because of the current bout of inflation. But the formula used for giving them compensation as per the CPWD contracts compensates them for only about 6 or 7%. So you are hit by about 10% in your construction contracts, where your margin may not be more than 9 or 10%. So the issue of price escalation for works contracts needs to be taken care of in future editions. Now, a very important question that many friends in Indian industry, I have made a presentation on public reforms, on the procurement reforms, to different chambers of commerce in Delhi and in the states. And a question that has been often asked is, so what? What is consequence management? What is going to happen if people don't follow these? If the notification by the finance ministry is fine, but where is consequence management? So let's come to the last but most important issue. What is consequence management? Let's look at it first. These rules have been incorporated in the general financial rules of the Union of India, which is timely payments, the process of procurement, the bidding process of QCBS, quality and financial scores, and honoring arbitration awards, right? Once it's incorporated in the general financial rules of the Union of India, it is inviolate. Every member of the bureaucracy and the political system have to follow it. So, how will they follow it? The best method is that CAG audits it and pulls up officers who do not follow these rules. And why should CAG audit it? The CAG will audit it because a very interesting development has happened as recently as 1st July 2022. On 1st July 2022, few months or what, 6 or 7 months since the notification was issued, the Central Vigilance Commission has pushed aside all historic notifications on public procurement and incorporated these changes in the public procurement manual of the CVC. So it has now gone into the DNA of the audit and vigilance process of this country. And come 1st July 2022, not come, as with effect from 1st July 2022, any officer who violates these is not only auditable, but the CVC can pick it up for non-compliance. This is a serious offense and it can't get more serious than that. So this is consequence management. So friends, from now onwards, just watch out for the central CAG audits and the strictures of the CVC, where an entire range of procurement authorities of the central government now are faced with these historic reforms of payments in 10 days' time, honoring arbitration awards, and having the facility for QCBS in quality-oriented projects, which is why I have called it a rather historic reform. And I must share with you, I'm a little surprised at the response of media and Indian industry who have not quite understood the significance of these historic reforms. I have seen very little news items and debate and editorials in the media. I have seen very little discussions on television. Many other trifling aspects are discussed every day. But probably the most serious public policy reform, historic since independence, has been carried out below the radar by the government. And Indian industry has not, I think, fully woken up to the power and significance of these reforms. Now, you could ask me, why did the government also not make a major shindig out of this with announcements by the PM, the FM, etc.? Well, I suppose there is a reason, as was explained to me. Firstly, this public procurement reform was mentioned in the FM's budget speech, but the government didn't make much of a song and dance about it. Why? And my answer to this is simple. Because it is such a significant reform that the only way you can push it down the system is to actually make it a cognizable offense. And we were waiting for the CVC manual on public procurement to be changed and the new provisions incorporated in the CVC manual, which is now auditable by CAG. That has happened 1st July 2022. So I would end by saying, friends, this is truly historic and watch this space. Thank you.